This video is on understanding and embracing what we will call universal principles. This is important because some underlying principles in life are universal. They are universal because they are independent of culture, religion, geography, language, and profession. Sociologists, in fact, have found that regardless of all these other cultural variables, some basic principles reflect the general expectations that any person could have in any society or any culture anywhere in the world. These universal principles are the ones that we try to instill in our children. These are the principles that we come to expect of one another, not only in our personal relationships but also in our business dealings. We think of people we know who live their lives according to these universal principles as people of good, sound moral character. They're considered worthy of our trust. Conversely, people who don't live their lives with these principles are people that we generally don't like to associate with or be around. If you find this information worthwhile, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. This is a brand new channel, and anything you can do to help the YouTube machine make this content easy for others to find is very much appreciated. Now, universal principles aren't absolute values or rules. They're more like general landmarks that we can use as a compelling guide that is compatible with our inner voice or intuition. These principles provide us with a rough standard of measure in a complicated world where we continually face challenging circumstances. While these universal principles can appear simplistic and obvious to us, they are useful in identifying and helping us prioritize the values that motivate us and drive us in every aspect of our lives. So, what are some of these universal principles? Universal principles can include such things as compassion, which is the overall concern for the well-being of others. Our love for humanity can include our respect for the autonomy and freedom of other people. Integrity and honesty are compelling universal principles. Willing compliance with the law is generally thought of as a universal principle of fairness. And justice is something that we all inherently seek as a universal principle. How about our responsibility to other living things, ourselves, and the environment? Courage is really important in every society. Self-discipline and self-control are thought to be universal principles required for healthy societies. Forgiveness is an important universal principle, without which our growth and development can be stifled in our lives. Wisdom and humility are generally thought to be universal principles as well. Generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that some internal commitment to some transcendent power is generally considered a universal principle. There may be others as well that we have not mentioned. The very nature of these universal principles implies that each of us accepts them as a general guide. We may define them differently, deal with them differently, and apply them personally, but we all accept them in some form. Nevertheless, we will find that some universal principles resonate more powerfully with us than others. If we are being honest, some universal principles are more vital to us than others at different times in our lives. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all. Take a few minutes to determine the universal principles that are the most dominant in your life and that most clearly resonate with you internally. Weigh them against each other and figure out your top 4. Then, prioritize the 4 dominant universal principles in your life from 1 to 4. Again, these are universal principles, so there's no right or wrong to this exercise. Your dominant universal principles will be very personal to you. When you have completed this exercise, you should have identified the 4 dominant universal principles in your life and prioritized them from 1 to 4. A pair of sociologists conducted an extensive study a few years ago to learn more about some of the factors that drive ethical and moral decisions in a business environment. In the process of doing that, they interviewed several hundred business leaders from across the country, representing small businesses, large businesses, you name it, and they had them complete an exercise very similar to the one that I just had you complete. One of the things that they discovered among these successful business leaders is that there was a very remarkable consistency in the top 4 universal principles that all of these successful business leaders have embraced. Isn't that interesting? Again, there's no right or wrong with the universal principles you selected there. However, the results of the study provide you with an opportunity to gain some perspective on your response. It gives you a benchmark against which you can compare your own responses with those of other successful business leaders. So what are those 4 universal principles that these business leaders consistently identified that they held in common? They were integrity, compassion, responsibility, forgiveness, and integrity. Let's examine each one at a time. First, integrity. I don't think I've ever seen a company that had actually taken the time to define its core values where integrity wasn't actually at the top of the list. It has become so ubiquitous as a stated value in the business community, almost to the point where it's overused and might have lost some of its impact. You know, no doubt that integrity could be found in the core values of companies such as Enron, WorldCom, and Lehman Brothers. Yet each of these companies collapsed in corporate scandals. So obviously there's got to be more to acting in alignment with the principle of integrity than just putting it on a plaque on a wall. The root of the word integrity comes from the Latin word that means whole effect. The word integer or whole number comes from that same root word. To be whole implies to be complete, undivided, and uncompromised. By that definition, the threat to the integrity of any person or organization comes from those small things, those seemingly microscopic things that are easily overlooked that begin to divide us and compromise us. For example, in the summer of 2007, there was an 8-lane steel truss arch bridge that carried Interstate 35 across the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It collapsed during rush hour. You might remember that it was a catastrophe. It was a failure that killed 13 people and injured 145 others. Interestingly, the year before that bridge collapsed, some inspectors were looking at it and they found microscopic metal fatigue cracks in those steel trusses. They reported some significant corrosion in the bearings of the bridge, which outwardly appeared to be a substantial structure that would probably last for decades. It had been compromised and lost its integrity. Those cracks and corrosion were directly attributable to the failure of the bridge. Women who've experienced a run in their nylon stockings are very familiar with the same type of failure that starts out as a very small thing, but pretty soon it ruins the entire garment and is useless. So it is with integrity in our personal and business lives. We have to watch those small things. Integrity consists of basically acting consistently with the principles, values, and beliefs that we embrace in our lives. It consists of telling the truth. It consists of standing up for what's right. When we stop keeping the promises that we make to ourselves and to others, we start to overlook important things or become compromised in very simple ways. And soon our integrity as a person or as a business is brought into question. And it may not be obvious at first, just as the bridge did not look compromised to the average person before it collapsed. But if we continually ignore these little things and don't act to repair the situations where our integrity begins to show cracks and face it, that happens to all of us. Eventually, we put ourselves and our business at risk of a catastrophe. You know, a collapse that is going to bring human casualties along with it. And what a tragedy that would be. The second universal principle of successful business leaders is the principle of compassion. One of my favorite books is a book called Moral Intelligence. And in fact, many of the principles in this video have been adopted from information that came to me in this book. I found a paragraph that I want to share with you about compassion. It reads, "Walk into a hospital nursery in Uganda. Another world is bright and bustling, and its residents, most not more than a day or two old, are amazingly social. In the nursery, there is no such thing as one crying infant. When one begins to cry, all the others join in." Psychologists who study newborn behavior call this neonate responsive crying. The newborn infant is crying in reaction to another person's distress. How can a baby only a few hours old respond to someone else's pain? Researchers aren't sure how, but they've ruled out other explanations for the infant's response. Interestingly, it seems that newborns don't cry when they hear a recording of their own crying, so it can't be just the noise itself that's bothering them. Many psychologists believe that neonatal responsive crying is the very first indication of an inborn capacity for empathy and compassion. To become compassionate moral beings, we first need the ability to see the world through others' eyes or hear the world through their cries. Empathy and compassion is a key step in which infants appreciate that others exist independently of them and that others have their own separate needs. It is little wonder that compassion is one of the 4 universal principles found in the lives of successful business leaders. It's a principle that seems to be hardwired into us, the ability to see the world through other people's eyes and hear the world through other people's cries. So we have integrity and compassion. The third one was responsibility. Bob Dylan once said that he thinks of a hero as someone who understands the degree of responsibility that comes with freedom. There's so much truth in that statement. And as that is true, it makes sense that with more freedom, flexibility, liberty, and independence comes more responsibility. Also, I heard somebody say once that they felt that our Statue of Liberty in the harbor off the coast of New York should be balanced by a Statue of Responsibility off the coast of California. And I think that that makes sense. It's a reminder that these two principles are so closely knit together. Sadly, today, too many people and far too many businessmen and businesswomen have adopted what's become a generally socially accepted attitude that there are no consequences to our actions. No one seems to want to take responsibility for their actions. That's a very dangerous mentality that has led many business owners down a slippery slope that sometimes ends like in the case of Bernie Madoff in prison. The first component of responsibility is taking personal responsibility for personal choices and actions. You know, it can be very tempting to avoid responsibility at all. It's one of my frustrations as a parent that I have tried to raise my children to the point where they can accept responsibility, but as you are probably aware, avoiding responsibility is typically a trait of the immature. In fact, I think it's fair to say that irresponsibility is really the hallmark of immaturity, isn't it? But we see this even among people who are old enough and experienced enough to know better. By continually and consistently taking personal responsibility for your choices and your actions, you put yourself in a position where you will avoid situations that can eventually blow up in your face. The second component of responsibility is admitting mistakes and failures. Admitting mistakes and failures. It sounds like such a simple thing. In his book, Good to Great Jim Collins, the author describes this quality as confronting the brutal facts. Jim Collins found that the businesses that he studied that embrace this kind of responsibility, admitting mistakes and failures, create an internal environment where the truth can be heard in their business. And when the truth can be heard in your business, especially when that truth is bad news, you at least give yourself a chance to respond, correct, and improve. The same is true of us as individuals. Self-reflection is vital. But if our personal or business culture is one in which mistakes and failures are spun or whitewashed, the people around us are quickly going to learn that we really aren't interested in the truth. And at that point, you're left with a culture where the truth can't be heard at all. The bad news is delivered, and you never get the opportunity to respond, correct, and improve until it's too late to do it. The third component of responsibility is to embrace service to others. Think back to the biological origins of compassion that are observed in hospital nurseries. You know, we come into this world programmed to be independent and interdependent with others. We have this innate need to make personal connections and to rely on others, and others rely on us. Society could never exist if we didn't have this interconnection in this capacity. So, if we don't work to serve others and contribute to the well-being and welfare of those around us, we fail to act responsibly. Serving others is a great way to demonstrate, model, and encourage the universal principle of responsibility. So, we've talked about integrity, compassion, and responsibility. The last of those four principles identified in the survey of successful business leaders was the principle of forgiveness. Forgiveness is essentially the ability to let go of our mistakes and mistakes in general, our own and others. Interestingly, those are actually two different sets of skills. Some people are good at one but might be poor at the other. You can probably think of somebody you know, maybe even yourself, who finds it easier to forgive another than it is to forgive yourself. Isn't it interesting that we generally accept that not forgiving others violates an important universal principle? But we don't easily recognize that failing to forgive ourselves violates that same principle. How does this apply to us? We find ourselves dealing with many different people with many different personalities. We frequently find ourselves wearing many different hats, as boss, employee, friend, neighbor, father, brother, son, etc. And so we find ourselves responding to different challenges in a variety of different ways and different capacities. Sometimes we're the salesman trying to close the deal. Sometimes we're the customer service representatives trying to address issues, questions, challenges, and problems. Sometimes we find ourselves as the employer, sometimes we're the vendor, and sometimes we're the purchaser of someone else's goods or services. And then on top of that, we go home and we're husband, wife, or companion to someone else. In each one of these roles and relationships, inevitably, we're going to be wronged by somebody. And equally inevitably, we're going to inflict wrong on others. Our success in business and life is strongly tied to cooperation, teamwork, and resiliency. It's so imperative, it's so important that, as a person of integrity, you have the ability to bounce back quickly, you know? Otherwise, all of the conflicts that arise in life and in business can easily consume you. So, forgiveness is a crucial part of personal resilience. No wonder successful business leaders consistently identify it as one of their top 4 universal principles. In conclusion, you should have identified the top 4 universal principles you personally embrace, and you've prioritized them in order of importance to you. It's really important for you to know the universal principles that are most dominant in your life. And it's critical that these principles are also prominent in the culture of the life, family, or business you want to build. By making sure that there's consistency between your universal principles and the principles that are embraced by the culture of your life, you're going to be able to keep your life in alignment with the things that resonate with you personally. As you do so, you'll sleep better at night, I promise you that. You've also learned the 4 universal principles that successful business leaders frequently share. You can use this information to weigh your own response against a benchmark that's established by people who are successful in business. If there's a formula to success in business, and many people think there is, it's very possible, if not likely, that these 4 universal principles play a powerful role in that formula. So you might find yourself looking at these principles and trying to determine ways in which you can magnify and amplify those principles in your life if they don't show up in your top 4. If there's a key to success, it may be in finding a way to adapt and align yourself with the principles that successful people embrace. Remember, you are on a quest. It's a quest for learning, development, wealth, success, life balance, and achievement. Thank you for watching. I hope that you found this video to be worthwhile and valuable. If you've got any comments or suggestions on the material in this video, please comment below. So now, as you think about building out your life, think about those universal principles that you selected that are most dominant and powerful for you. Then envision how you're going to build your life around those universal principles. How are those principles going to be reflected in your actions and attitudes? How are you going to make your home and business a reflection of what's really important to you? As you do that, you're going to find real joy and fulfillment in building your life. You will feel a lot of comfort and a lot of value in doing something because you know that you can stand behind what you believe in. So, until next time, here is to your great life.